Functions in Swift 3 allow us to organize our code much more efficiently. A primary goal whenever you code in any language is to not write the same line of code more than once, and functions are a big part of helping us achieve that. Let's see how they work by implementing a function inside of our playground. Now, so far, I have this while loop and a count that goes round and round it. Now, what if I wanted to write a while loop that did the same thing again? Well, I would have to copy all of that code, and that is a very bad thing. So let's create a function that uses that while loop. And the way we create a function in Swift 3 is by using the keyword func. And let's call this check count. And then we open and close some brackets, and I'll come to those again in a minute. Open and close some braces. Now we're going to grab all of our count and while code and dump it into that function and save it. Now the first thing you're going to notice is that there is nothing printed out on the right-hand side. And that's because a function doesn't run as default. You actually have to do what's called calling the function. And the way we call it is by its name, check count with 2 brackets. And now the function will get called, execute, and that loop should go round as many times as it needs to. Now, the reason we have these 2 brackets here, the open and close, is because functions can pass over values or variables or other items to themselves. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's look at a basic idea of it. Let's go to our function of check count, and we're going to pass over a variable called message, and this is of type string. So now our variable expects to have a message string each time. And that's why we have this red error. It says missing argument for parameter message in call. And that's what these are called. They're called arguments or parameters, or there are 1 or 2 other ways of calling them. But an argument is a good word to remember. So we have to pass it over in check count. We have to say the message I'm going to pass you is the following: not yet. And that string gets passed over to our check count. And then inside of our check count, we can use that message, for example, here under print message. And that will print out not yet 10 times. So we can pass over these variables. Now, the advantage of doing this is I can now run check count and I can send a message called grant. And it's going to execute that code. And if I just drag up this bottom, look how it's executed not yet and grant. And the beauty of that is that, look, we've only written 2 lines of code and we've used the same function, but we've gotten a different result. So that's the fantastic thing about functions. Now we can pass over more than one parameter. So inside of our function, let's have something we pass over called count 0. And of course, whoops, we don't want count 0, we want count integer, because this is of type integer. And now our 2 function calls are incorrect. So I'm just going to delete this one because we don't need it. And inside of here, I'm going to pass over my count, and I'm going to give that 0. So now it's passing over 2 parameters to check count. And inside of my check count function, I'm going to make this one equal to count. But this is kind of bad practice because I have 2 counts here, so I would probably want to rename my count up here to something like p count. This can be anything you like. I'm just calling it p count for past count. And of course, we have to change it down here to pcount. So always try to name your variables differently unless it makes sense to have them the same. So now if I changed this passed over count to 5, my loop will only run 5 times because the count is starting at 0. And this is a bit of a contrived example, but I think you get the idea. Now the other thing is always call your function something obvious. Check count. I've got a verb, I've got a noun, and it's telling you exactly what it is doing. Always make sure it is descriptive. Don't make it too long, make it short, but descriptive nonetheless. Now the final part of functions is the fact that they can return something. And the way we specify them returning something is with a dash, a forward triangular bracket, and we specify the type of thing it's going to return. It could be a string, an integer, a boolean, whatever you like. Now, there's an error down here, and it says it's missing return in a function. And that's because it expects us to use the return word and then pass back some kind of string. So let's have done as passed back. Now, our check count receives back a string, and you can see that we have this done printed out with it. So it's a good way of passing back some kind of message from our strings, or from our functions rather.